Welcome to another show of the Abwazi Wine Buzz. Today's guest is reminiscent of what I call future generations of winemakers. We're familiar with Australian generational families. We're also very familiar with Italian generational winemakers. But to hear about American generational winemakers is not that common. In fact, quite rare. And even more rarer is the fact when you see the dynasty beginning. And that's who I'm going to interview today. The gentleman is Mark McWilliams, and he's going to tell us about his winery. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Dr. Lee, it's a pleasure to be on with you, and I look forward to our visit.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly would love to do that when I'm down there next. Now, Mark, with a name like McWilliams, it proudly trumpets a Scottish background. Could you share more on this, Mark?
Well, you nailed it. My family heritage is Scottish, and being involved in the wine business as long as I have, sometimes I wish we did make single malt because there are some days that you need a little bit more than wine in my business. But we are a Scottish and English heritage.
Okay. Do you know which part of Scotland?
The northern part of Scotland. I don't know the exact county or area, but northern Scotland.
Well, that's something for you next time you sip your single malt, something to consider.
I've been all throughout Europe. I've been to London, but I have never actually been up to Scotland, and so it's definitely on my short list of places to visit.
Well, I think that's something you can take the children with you too, right?
I would love to. Absolutely. They would love
Perfect.
to.
Perfect. Now, Mark, you weren't born into the wine business and you didn't begin your career in the wine business. What did you actually do before getting involved in the industry?
So upon graduation from college, and actually I should probably one step back. When
Please.
I was in probably junior high or kind of my early teen years is when my parents purchased land in Sonoma County. My parents had vacation, spent a lot of time in Napa and Sonoma through the 1980s, early 1990s. They bought a piece of land and planted it with the dream that one day they would retire to California from Texas, born and raised in Texas. Um, but as a kid, teenager, it wasn't that exciting. When I closed my eyes and thought about coming to California, I think I envisioned time spent on a beach. And when I arrived in Northern California for the very first time, and it was August and everybody was wearing polar fleeces and it was 52 degrees, I was like, what's going on? This isn't California. It's not really for me. So I kind of went through my teenage years. We would visit California. We would come out for Thanksgiving or Christmas or the summer season, but it wasn't anything that was really on my radar. When I graduated from university, my plan was to do something internationally, probably policy. I was a international business and Spanish major. I had dreams of moving to Latin America. My parents knew me well enough to know that just having a dream and moving to Latin America without a job, they knew that I would be on their dime longer than they wanted me to be on their dime, that I needed to have a job lined up before I moved. So we kind of made a deal. And that was, why don't you move to California, work a harvest, see if you like it. And if you do, great. And if not, then you have our blessing to go pursue whatever it may be that you want to do in Latin America. And so to be totally candid, I kind of thought I was going to spend one harvest in California and then go sink my teeth into a very different profession. And that's when fate grabbed me, and my life never looked as I thought it would when I graduated from college.
So that's really 22 vintages on, and you can still recall that very first one, I'm sure. So would you say that invitation, very luring invitation by your parents, was really what propelled you, although inadvertently?
I do. There's no doubt in my mind. Few times in my life have I had, or I guess maybe been fortunate to have what I would truly call an epiphany. And I had an epiphany. It was really 24 years ago, my first harvest here. So before my family started Arista as a winery, I was working in the wine business for another winery, a large winery.
Ah,
And I can remember to this day, I can tell you what I was wearing. I remember the weekend. It was Labor Day weekend. So first weekend in September in the year 2000. And I was working for a large winery. I was walking a Chardonnay vineyard. I was with two winemakers. I'd only been in California for a few weeks working. I just moved in August. Here it is early September. And I'm walking this vineyard with these two winemakers and they're tasting Chardonnay and I'm listening to them talk. I'm kind of nibbling grapes, walking behind them. And as they're talking and tasting, I'm tasting, and I'm beginning to connect these dots in real time. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is how this all works. It's grapes, you pick them, this turns into wine. And as silly as that sounds, I just had never kind of connected those dots. And then suddenly I'm realizing how beautiful. Look what I'm doing. I'm walking through this vineyard. It's incredible weather. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. In that moment, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I hadn't studied it. I knew I had a lot to learn. I didn't really even know what this is what I want to do meant, but I knew I'd never been more excited about anything in my life. And it was in that moment that I said, hey, I'm going back to school. I'm going to join tasting groups. I'm going to start paying attention at work. And 24 years ago, Labor Day weekend, my life changed for the positive.
and that's how it all began. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us, Mark. I think how everyone makes that decision is quite a personal statement. And yet when the bug catches you, it catches you wholly and truly. And it you never sort of get away from it, sort of thing. Sorry.
You're right. You're right. 24 years later, in a sense, I still feel like I'm working my summer job. I mean, it's just like there's still this passion, there's a curiosity, there's a joy in this business. 24 years later, sure, you have a different perspective on the industry, but there's still at the core of it all a genuine
Right.
passion that drives you.
Of course. Mark, tell us about the winery Arista. How did the name come about and how big is it?
So the name, it's Greek in origin. Aristos is the actual word. It means the best or the top. It's the same root word that we have aristocracy, aristocrat. It means the best or the top, which is what we're shooting for, what we wanted to be, what we hope to be. In terms of our size, we're a relatively small brand, small but mighty, kind of by decision. We make on average about 6,000 or 7,000 cases of wine split between Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, exclusively from the Russian River Valley,
Mm-hmm.
either our estate, so the vineyards that we own, or a handful of families, probably 6 or 7 families that we purchase fruit from.
Perfect, perfect. So do you say mainly from the grapes on the estate? Do you also use grapes from other vineyards at all?
We do. So the estate, kind of home base for us, is really where my parents' home is. It's where the winery is located. That's a 36-acre piece of land, of which about 10 are planted, mainly to Pinot Noir. There's 9 acres of Pinot Noir, 1 acre of Chardonnay. So that estate represents approximately a quarter of our annual production.
Okay.
The balance are going to be families, and we have worked very hard. We can kind of get into that if you'd like to, but over the past 24 years, we have worked really hard to identify and align with kind of if California had a cru system, a Grand Cru, Premier Cru, how do you find and align with these Grand Cru sites? And so I wish we could own them all. It'd be nice to. We can't. So the next best thing is to partner with some of the best growers in the region and purchase fruit from them.
Of course. Now, talking about vines, they sort of define everything. How did you gather your vine clippings from your famous winery neighbors? And who were they, if you can reveal that?
Well, I can reveal who my neighbors are, but I don't know if I can fully reveal where all the cuttings came from.
Okay.
So,
Well, we'll
um,
leave that to be the secret sauce, the secret ingredient.
that's right.
Okay.
Sometimes you got to believe in Santa Claus, right?
Sure.
So where we're located really is an important part of our story. I guess our address would be the town of Healdsburg, in the Russian River Valley.
Yes, I've
But more
been there.
specifically, it's a great town, and I would
It
encourage
is.
anyone that has not visited. It is as charming as you can imagine a wine country town, and it's small, 10,000 people. It's a small town. But specifically, we're located on a road called West Side Road. West Side Road, books have been written, movies have been made about the little road that we're on. It's full of iconic producers: Rocchioli, William Sellion, Gary Farrell, Davis Bynum, Kistler, Dumole,
Okay.
Flowers, Bacigalupi. It's a true high concentration of some of the most famous producers of Pinot and Chard, really in California in my mind, but certainly in Sonoma County. And nestled amongst them, my family purchased our land a little over 24 years ago.
Well, that's what Russian River is very famous for, and Harrodsburg as well. I recall with great fondness my travels there and taking time out and walking, right to the mouth of the river itself and just pondering a moment and looking and absorbing the beauty. So you're very fortunate to live in that part of the world.
I
Now,
appreciate
Mark,
that. Yes, sir.
you obviously, you're working, you're totally ensconced into the work. How do you manage your time with a lovely wife, not two, not three, but four children?
I was hoping maybe you had some suggestions. You know, we certainly don't profess to have it right or have figured that out. I guess the beauty, though, of living in a small agricultural community, owning a business, is that we really have it, for better or for worse. There's not a defined line, I don't think, in my family between kind of what work and what private or personal time is. My kids, who are a little bit older now, I have
Yeah.
a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 11-year-old, and a 10-year-old. But as we've raised them here, dad was at work. They came out to the winery. They came out to the vineyard. My parents lived here. It just kind of is this amorphous blending of, we don't work at a 9 to 5 kind of job. And
Yeah.
so there's time off, but there's time that you're here. And our kids, they work at the winery to this day. They're involved in our hospitality tasting room. They kind of back our hospitality team. They work harvest. They work uh, during production. So we've tried to kind of make this just who we are, a part of it. As they've gotten older, it's a little more challenging now because they're in sports, and we love to,
Of course.
separate from that. But you know, I feel blessed, sincerely, to get to have raised my children in a vineyard, in a winery setting, in a community that's full of other families doing the same thing. It's weird, but it's also normal for us.
Not at all. I mean, I think it's enviable that you've created that environment for them. Do you see them following your footsteps and the generation into the winery
I hope
business?
so. Of course, I think I would love for them to be the next generation. One of my best friends here is a fifth generation winemaker, which to me is incredible. That is
Of course.
rare, rare, rare.
Very rare.
Um, but who knows? I mean, the last thing I want to do is force my children into this. I think they're too young. But my
Yeah.
brother and I were partners in this business, and we certainly set the business up with the hopes that a next generation, whichever that might be, wants to take it over.
Well, you can't do better than the bonding of blood, especially family blood. So there we are. Now,
Yes, sir.
talking about generations, who influenced you the most? Mom Janice or Dad Al?
Hmm. You know, Probably my mom. I think it's a tough one because they've influenced us in different ways, but maybe a funny, people wonder. I'm from a small town in East Texas, Texarkana, Texas. How in the world did we go from Texarkana to Sonoma County making wine? And in a weird way, that thread goes through my mother. After college, moved. She was a French major. She moved to France. She lived in France for many years.
Oh,
She spent time in Lyon, so right between Burgundy and the Rhone. And at a very young and impressionable age, she fell in love with French cuisine, cooking, and she carried that with her to this day. But as a kid growing up in Texarkana, she was always cooking. There were always smells and flavors. And I think as a young kid, I hated some of the weird French foods she made me try. But as I think back and the influences that I have,
hmm.
smells and taste and kind of the curiosity of that has been a huge influence on me, I would say personally, but I think has driven us towards California, towards Sonoma County, this industry. So I think in that sense, my mother has had a pretty profound influence on the direction of our family business.
Well, she could not have chosen a finer spot to study and appreciate the culinary greatness of what France has to offer, and that is Lyon. It is a very well documented and acknowledged center of cuisine. So yes, in many ways, you are fortunate now to have had that heritage.
The
Now,
benefit of,
why did they get into the business? Was it just wanting to think, well, that's something we'll get into to retire?
I think that was my father was an orthodontist, but kind of maybe in stereotypical Texas fashion, we grew up on a family ranch that had been in our family for over 150 years. And so
Do you still have it?
cattle, it's still in our family. Yes, sir.
Okay.
But we had grown up around cattle farming, ranching, and my father enjoyed that kind of work. It was almost therapy for him from, his dental practice. And so when they found California, it was like, wow, all of that without the heat and the humidity. And my father jokes about this, but there's a lot of truth to it. As an orthodontist, my father is an artist. He's an amazing painter and photographer.
Mhm.
He has an incredible eye for the aesthetic and balance. And he talks a lot about having this kind of moment where he realized viticulture, specifically wine grape growing, married this interest in farming, but this aesthetic. There's a beauty. There's lines and there's balance to a vineyard
Mhm.
that maybe isn't the same as other kind of crop. And I think my father, he was drawn to the artistry, but the science of this business.
Sure.
But he never really had an interest, I don't think, in the winemaking side. He always wanted to have a little vineyard. He loved that idea, an olive orchard and a vineyard and a place to retire to. And so I know that was their dream. They really never had the dream or the thought that we would get into the winemaking side of things until my
Wow.
brother and I came along.
Spectacular. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Now, apart from marrying the love of your life and having four wonderful children, what else do you consider to be your greatest personal achievement, Mark, especially focused on the winery?
Yeah. Man, you ask great questions, Dr. Lee. Um, I think I'm proud of having built a business from nothing. My family 2 generations ago, if you count my father starting all of this, my brother and I now taking this over, I would have never dreamed that we would do what we're doing. I think there's a lot of pride, yeah, that we have in that. I do believe that where we've done this kind of amongst these giants, our neighbors who are now our friends, but amongst these giants to kind of come in as an outsider with big dreams, to be able to do this, I'm certainly proud of that. I think 24 years in, we certainly have developed a reputation that we kind of can stand on now. We're not just the winery between such and such famous wineries. I think people know who we are now. And so I would just say doing that as a family with my brother, with my parents, there's a tremendous amount of pride and satisfaction that we have in that.
Well, you know what? I think that's also part to the Lone Star State, that sort of Texan embodiment of never give
Can
up.
do.
So,
Yeah, exactly right.
well, good for you. Good for you. Now,
Yeah.
in life, we have achievements, joys. We have this neighbor. It's called disappointment. There's been disappointments, I'm sure. What was the biggest one that you've had at the winery, and how did you pick yourself up by the bootstraps, as it were, wipe the sort of dust off the coat, and fight another day?
Can I say next question? You're right. It's not always great. I think you're going to face adversity and challenges, and there have been many. One that comes to mind, though, that really sits with me and has been a motivating factor of mine. When my brother and I, we hadn't even taken over the business yet from my parents. My brother and I took over the business going into 2013. Leading up to that, there was a very vivid, kind of embarrassing or painful moment that happened in 2011. I was invited by a few of my friends, they're winemakers, to a private, but it was going to be a blind tasting
Okay.
amongst some pretty prestigious winemakers, Pinot producers throughout California, up and down the entire state. and it was being somewhat unofficially hosted by a very famous critic. I won't say who it is, but a
Sure.
very famous critic. But it was in a private home. It was kind of amongst friends. It wasn't ever meant to be published. And there's probably 20 of us. And I was excited. I got invited. I couldn't believe that I'd even been invited. And I bring a few wines. We had a few different flights of these wines. And as we went through the wines blind, it's embarrassing, or it's you bare your soul. You don't know what's going to happen. And as we went through those wines, pretty much the three flights, the bottom or towards the bottom of the stack rank were my wines. And I mean, that it stung. It stung a lot, but it was a moment that I needed to have
Mm,
because, in a sense, from 2002 until maybe 2012, I wouldn't say that we were on an autopilot, but I think that we were still just trying to figure the business out, and just we were having fun. We were just kind of saying yes to anything, and just, I don't know, we were having fun, but it was time to get serious and really hone in on what we were trying to be. And it was this moment that I'll never forget amongst who I considered an aspirational set. These were producers that I really thought my wines were kind of in that category. And it became very clear that we weren't. And instead of really just kind of being embarrassing and sulking away, it was this moment of resolve for me and my brother that, okay, it's time for us now to grow up. It's time for us now to really address these qualitative things that we got to get serious about it. We want to truly be a benchmark producer.
hmm
We've got to change a lot, like where our fruit's coming from, how we're making these wines. Everything had to be on the table, and that tasting really was the impetus for 2 years of conversation that my brother and I had as we moved into taking over the business from our parents, which was a whole nother long conversation, led to some positive but wholesale changes in philosophy, approach to winemaking, vineyard sources, etc. A lot of stuff.
Well, from the sounds of it, it really appears to be that sort of silver lining that you needed to to
Yeah,
to to get you up and, as they would say, Adam boy, right?
up and at 'em. Well, I mean, life is you're gonna always face
Oh
adversity.
yes.
There's always these challenges, and so how do you respond to that? Do you just kind of lay down? Do you tuck your tail and just walk off, or do
Yeah.
you can you look in the mirror and say, okay, we got to make some changes? And that's kind of what my brother and I did, and
Well, that
they
takes
weren't
big
easy
shoulders.
changes.
Yeah.
Yep,
So well done to you.
I
Now,
appreciate it.
talking
Thank
about shoulders and tears and disappointments, Pinot Noir is often given the descriptor of being a widowmaker, for winemakers. It's hard, it's
you.
unforgiving, and if
Yeah.
it's not done well, it's tragedy personified. What
You'll either never forget it or you'll want to forget it.
so what makes your Pinot Noir special, Mark?
Couple things. I mean, that's a complicated question, I believe, but to try to kind of put it into a few different parts,
Sure.
it always starts with the source. You alluded to it. The special sauce really is that combination terroir. It's terroir, right?
hmm
It's the combination of site, soil, topography, climate, weather, etc. So you really have to have truly blue chip A plus sites. And it's easy to say that. It is super hard to find
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
And once you identify that, generally you're not the first person that's identified that, right? There's a lot of people competing for a very finite resource that want access to that great fruit. So but you have to start with exceptional fruit. Then you have to have exceptional winemaking, and you have to have real discipline. I can't convey the discipline and the consistency required to make exceptional Pinot Noir over and over again. It is a well-earned reputation. It's a thin-skin variety.
Yep.
It is very susceptible to everything that you don't want to be susceptible to: bugs, weather, disease. It's a difficult grape. It's a magnifier of faults and flaws. So it goes back to an exceptionally talented winemaking team that understands, that has protocols in place. And then lastly, I'd say too, there has to be this kind of strong convictions loosely held. We have very intense beliefs about how we do this, but we always remain open to maybe there's a different way to do it, to consider Yeah, one quick example there. When our wine, so when my brother and I took over the business in 2013, we brought in a new winemaker.
Okay.
Absolutely, the key to the success that we've had. His name is Matt Courtney. When Matt joined us, we had never used whole cluster in our fermentation process, meaning
Okay.
leaving stems in. It was always destemmed. And as we began to internally trial for years, we did a 5 or 6 year trial internally and ultimately arrived at some stem inclusion makes a more compelling wine. It's more interesting. It took us years to figure out, though, how much, which vineyard. I mean, it's not just as simple as, yeah, leave the stems on.
Of course.
But that was something that we had previously never done and we really didn't think we ever wanted to. But as we began to look at it and be open to it and then study it and learn it, we realized that there is a way to make a more compelling wine with that,
That
as an
that
example.
is quite remarkable, and I'm sure it reflects itself in the wine itself, Mark. Now, talking about, your winemaker, a winery is not the owner. It's not just one individual.
Right.
It's a team. And Mark, and clearly your team is now extremely tight. All,
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some research, all the right positions, the winemakers, the associate winemakers, assistant winemaker, your ground crew, and not forgetting your marketing team.
Mm-hmm.
You also have this concierge, hospitality, shipping. What traits that are really not negotiable do you look for when you bring in a team member?
Mm-hmm. You know, I want passion. I want somebody to be passionate about uh, their role, whether it is marketing, whether it's winemaking, whether it's our vineyard manager. I want somebody that loves it, deeply loves it. I want somebody that is a self starter, a motivator, that doesn't need a lot of like direction. I think my brother and I, one thing that our management style, and therefore maybe we look for a type of person that operates in that, is not to be this micromanager. We strongly believe in trying to find and hire the most talented people at a position and get out of their way. Let them be great at what it is they do. Um, I want somebody that can that is strongly convicted about whatever their role is, that can handle a little bit of some back and forth, that wants to defend their position, but is also willing to listen and maybe try something. I kind of
Of
alluded
course.
to that previously, but it, you know, there has to be a curiosity too. I don't care. We've been fortunate. Our winemaking team, they've been with us for 12 years and they came from a winery that they were together for 8 years prior to that. So 20 years that they've been together, a lot of respect for one another, a lot of passion. But 22 years into this, they're still curious. They still
Oh,
love
yes.
it. There's a curiosity that I look for in someone that they would do this whether anybody was watching or paying them. They want to do this. That's the kind of
Sure.
person I'm looking for.
Sure. I think you and I can both testify. 20 years sounds like a really long time, but having been involved in the wine world myself for over 20 years, there's never a day, never a moment, never a bottle or glass of wine that you try and you start thinking, my goodness, how was this made? Maybe if I tried it, and you make a comparison, there's always this yearning, this wanting to learn. So yeah, I think that is a great quality that you look for. Now, talking
Because when you
about
have,
quality,
oh,
sorry,
go,
Mark.
sorry, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say when you have passion, when you have people that are like very talented and they have these strong convictions, um, but they're open to other ideas and they are very respectful of one another. There's this kind of synthesis, this synergy that really is created where our PR or marketing people are driven by the talent of our winemaking team. The winemaking team is driven by the passion that our vineyard management team has. Our general manager is blown away by the talent of all of this, and she's got to bring her game, and it just kind of begins to feed on itself.
Certainly. And that is highly, highly commendable. Now, talking about the quality, the passion, let's talk about the wine. How and where can the audience listening into today's program buy your wine? And
Mhm.
can you share some information on your A-list. We hear about A-list actors, but tell us about the A-list wine grouping that you have.
Yes, sir. So I wish that I could say that we were smart enough 22 years ago to have this all figured out, but the A list just kind of evolved. It developed. We never started out, well, one step back. We are fortunate enough to sell the vast majority, about 85, 90% of our wine direct to consumer. As a small brand, you kind of have to do that in order to be viable. The combination of our tasting room that people can come visit us, we are open. We ask for an appointment. You don't have to have an appointment. We certainly can see you without one, but making an appointment just makes it easier for us to accommodate you. But between our tasting room and then the A list, which is a mailing list, we sell about 85% of our product. The A list evolved. It was never, we don't have a wine club in the traditional sense. There's
Oh,
not a,
okay.
you join us and quarterly you get a shipment of pre-selected whatever. It really is an allocation. You get an offering, 2 bottles of this, 3 bottles of that. You pick and choose from what you're offered. You can always ask for more. And we've just found not having a traditional club where you almost are compelled to take things. We have people who've been on our list for 20 years that just they love being on. They buy what they want to buy, how they want to buy it, when it's offered, and it's just worked out for us.
Now, our audience is international, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Can people buy outside of the United States or only in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. We have an international client base. So we have customers in Europe, we have customers in Canada, we have customers in Asia, we have customers in Latin America. So absolutely. Obviously there are some shipping issues
Of
and things,
course.
considerations
But
there,
then
but
you have a shipping department.
we have a gal who handles that. I mean, truly, we
Yeah,
ship all over the world. We have distribution around the world, and we ship direct to consumer around the world.
that's excellent. Now, talking about hospitality, let's say if you could have four guests for dinner with a three-course meal,
Mhm.
Mark, what would you have and what wine would you pair it with? No Pinot Noir and no Chardonnay, please.
Can you have a meal without Pinot Noir or Chardonnay? All right, we can do this. So,
Three-course meal.
oh, three
What would
courses.
you have and what would you
Yeah.
pair it with?
So I think that I would do some sort. The wine is how I kind of start with. It would be a Riesling. It would be Cabernet is how I would start. A
Okay.
German Riesling Cabernet. I have some little producers that are a little off the beaten path, but if we're getting down to the producer level, there's a small producer called Hofgut Falkenstein. Absolutely love their wines.
Jan
They're
Falkenstein.
laser
Okay.
laser focused, and I would do that with some sort of crudo hamachi, where there's a whisper of some spice, but not much, just enough to know it's there, but some fresh fish with the acidity and a little bit of the residual sugar of the Riesling, just to kind of wake everyone's palate up.
My mouth's watering. Yeah.
I'm in on that, and I would be content if we stopped. But the second course, I love. We can't do Pinot and Chard. Outside of that, it's probably Barolo Nebbiolo for me
Barolo.
in
Okay.
terms of the
Yeah, I
wine
like
that
that.
I love. And so if I'm doing that, changing pace here, I think that I would go with some sort of like risotto, mushroom risotto. There would have to be some
Hmm.
truffles that go on top of that. And then we're going Barolo, another kind of weird producer, small producer, Lorenzo Accamasso, one of my favorite producers of Barolo, really classic traditional style of Barolo. And then dessert, right? Is that what we go, or we go three savories,
Yeah,
or is it?
let's go for dessert now. We've got to
Mhm.
watch our weight.
Exactly right. So if I'm going to pair this, I don't even know what I would do. I'm not a dessert guy, I tend to drink my dessert. And
Sure.
so yeah, I may it's easy. I mean, it would have to be something sticky, probably. It could be, oh, I don't know if I want to go German or if I want to go French. I probably would stick to my German love. I would probably do some sort of Trockenbeeren Auslese, and
Okay.
maybe we would go ahead and add some sort of like creme brulee or something where we're getting that crunchy caramelized, sugar on top of that sweet dessert, but that would be great just with a Trockenbeer and
Well,
Auslese.
if it's a Trockenbeer and Auslese, it's going to be really, really sweet. So,
Yep. Yep. That's why I say I like to drink my dessert. There's no need to have an additional dessert on top of a
sure.
TBA.
Well, that sounds like a superb meal. And I think it's probably one of the meals. Of course, you're going to have two additional with the Pinot and Chardonnay. And I think that would be great for a celebratory dinner that you and your brother and family should have for the wonderful achievements that you have to date. And I certainly will follow your winery with great interest when the next generation comes, Mark, and that won't be too long if
No, that's
your
hopefully
son is
sooner.
already at 17. So
Yes,
maybe in
sir.
5, 6 years' time, he may really be getting his hands deeply and more fundamentally involved in the winery.
I
It's
can
been a
only
great
hope.
pleasure interviewing you and readers and listeners. If you do have the opportunity to go to Harrodsburg, I do suggest you go there. I've been there. It's a wonderfully beautiful country. The landscape is quite magnificent, and the people, uh, they themselves have a true quality of goodness in them. And don't forget to visit Arista. That's Mark McWilliams and his entire crew. Mark, thank you very much for being on the show with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Dr. Lou, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on, to get to share our story with you. And you have a standing invitation. The next time you're in Healdsburg, it would be a treat to get to share my family's wines with you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for watching our video. And if you liked our video, please like, share, comment, subscribe to our channel.